The morning of Parents' Day at Westbrook Elementary, or I've the way late spring mornings sometimes do. In the Midwest, bright and sharp and full of a warmth that felt almost like a promise. Balloons in blue and gold floated above the main entrance, tied to iron fence posts with knit little bows. A banner stretched across the front gate in large block letters, WELCOMETO Parents' Day. The grass had been freshly cut, and the smell of it drifted across the parking lot in slow, pleasant waves. Children moved through the front courtyard in their best clothes, patent leather shoes clicking against the concrete, hair combed, flat collars. Straight teachers stood near the doors with lanyards around their necks and clipboards in their hands, smiling the kind of professional smiles that were real enough but also practiced. It was, by all appearance, is the kind of morning that looked exactly the way a school event was supposed to look. Parking lot filled quickly. SUVs and sedans glided into the painted spaces, one after another. Black, silver, white, a pearl-colored Mercedes idled near the entrance while its driver checked her lipstick in the mirror. A Tesla slid silently into a corner, spat its owner stepping out in a charcoal blazer and polished Oxfords. A couple climbed from a gleaming BMW. The woman in a cream pants, sit the man in a pressed linen shirt. Conversations started up between parents who knew each other, a word about a recent renovation, a mention of a company's quarterly performance, a laugh about a vacation that had gone slightly wrong in the best kind of way. The morning had a texture to it, smooth, self-assured, carefully maintained. It was in this scene that a sound arrived before its source did. A low, slightly rough idle, the kind that came not from neglect but from years of misuse, announced the car before it appeared around the corner of the lot. The vehicle was a Ford Mustang, deep navy blue, from an era when cars were built with a different kind of weight to them. The paint held its color in most places, though near the rear passenger panel it had faded to something closer to gray. The front bumper carried a small dent on the left side, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The chrome around the headlights was clean. The tires were not new, but they were even and properly inflated. The car moved with a steadiness that had nothing to do with luxury and everything to do with care. It pulled slowly into a space near the back of the lot, and its engine gave a single low shudder before going quiet. Inside, before the door opened, Ethan Walker sat for just a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. He was 29 years old, tall enough that he had to tilt his head slightly in the driver's seat, with broad shoulders that came from years of real physical work, not a gym but a garage floor. A hydraulic lift, a rusted bolt that wouldn't turn. His hair was dark brown, cut short and neat. His jaw was square and his eyes a gray-blue that shifted depending on the light, held a particular kind of stillness that some people mistook for distance and others recognized as discipline. He was wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, collar open. He did not look like the other fathers in the lot, and he knew it. On the passenger seat beside him, a 7-year-old girl sat with her feet not quite reaching the floor and her hands wrapped around a folded piece of card. Stock Lily Walker had her father's eyes and her mother's cheek bones, dark hair pulled back with a yellow ribbon tied into a bow that she had insisted on doing herself that morning, even though it had taken 4 tries. She was wearing a blue dress with small white flowers along the collar. In her lap, the piece of card stock was folded carefully in half, and on the front, in hand writing that mixed uppercase and lowercase letters in the way that 7-year-olds when they are trying very hard, were the words, "My dad is my hero." "Dad," she said, "are you going to tell my class about the carburetor?" Ethan looked at her, the corner of his mouth lift it just slightly, "only if someone asks." "I might ask," she said, very seriously. "Then I'll tell you," he said, "but I think the real hero today is the girl who made that card. I don't know if you noticed, but it's pretty good." Lily looked down at the card. Stock, her cheeks went pink. She pressed it a little tighter to her chest. Ethan opened the door and stepped out. A small cross on a thin leather cord swayed from the rearview mirror. As the car settled, his father's left behind like most things his father had owned without ceremony and without instruction, just quietly present in a way that meant everything. The interior smelled faintly of motor oil, and the peppermint candies Lily kept in the cup holder. He walked around to her side, opened the door, helped her down, and then crouched in front of her to straighten the yellow ribbon. He was doing that, adjusting the bow, his large hands careful and slow, when the first voice reached them. "They letting people park antiques here now?" The comment came from a man in a charcoal vest standing near, a silver SUV, speaking just loudly enough to be heard, and just quietly enough to pretend it was private. A woman near by covered her mouth with her fingers, though not before the shape of a smile formed beneath them. "That thing sounds like it's auditioning for a scrapyard." Lily heard it, the slight lift at the corners of her mouth, the expression she'd been wearing since she woke up that morning, since she'd finished the card the night before, since she'd checked 3 times that the ribbon was still in her hair. That expression faded slowly like a lamp being turned down. Her grip on the card stuck, tightened. Ethan finished straightening the bow. He stood. He did not look toward the man or the woman. He offered Lily his hand. She took it, and they walked toward the school entrance. The woman stepped down from the black SUV near the front entrance. At that same moment was the kind of person a room rare. Ange itself around. Vanessa Cole was 27 years old, the founder and chief executive of a fashion label that had appeared on the cover of 3 industry publications in the last 18 months. She was dressed in a black dress that fit with the precision of something made specifically for her body, the neckline cut in a clean V, her blonde hair falling in loose, practiced waves. She wore red heels and a single gold bracelet. Several parents turned to greet her as she stepped out. She was the event's primary sponsor, and her name was on the program in bold lettering. She carried herself the way people do when they have spent long enough being looked at that they have begun to expect it. She saw the Mustang. She saw Ethan. Something shifted behind her eyes, a quick calibration, the kind that happens in people who have learned to read rooms and make decisions about what belongs in them. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she said, her voice carrying easily across the short distance between them. Several people near by turned to look. "This is a school event, not a swap meet." Light laughter moved through the cluster of parents near the entrance. Ethan stopped. He looked at her without urgency, without heat. "My daughter goes to school here," he said. Vanessa glanced at the Mustang, then back at him, and let the pause do the work that words would have been too obvious to do. "They really should add a vehicle policy to the event guidelines," she said more broadly now, to no one in particular, and therefore to everyone. "A car like that does something to the atmosphere." More laughter, softer this time, but present. Ethan looked at Lily. She was staring at the ground, the card pressed flat against the front of her dress. He looked back at Vanessa with the same calm expression. "That car got my daughter here safely," he said. "That's all it needs to do." A few people laughed at that too, but differently, the way people laugh when they're not entirely sure what they're laughing at. Near the front doors of the school, Principal Margaret Hensley had stepped outside to observe the rivals. She was 62 years old, a small woman with white hair cut just below her ears and glasses with wire frames that she wore pushed slightly down her nose. She had been the principal of Westbrook Elementary for 19 years. She had seen a great many things in those years, and she had learned slowly that the ones worth paying attention to were rarely the loudest. She was watching the exchange near the parking lot without expression when her gaze drifted to the Mustang, still sitting where it had been parked, its navy paint catching the morning sun at a low angle. She looked at the license plate, W1971. Her expression did not change, but she did not look away, and something in her posture shifted, a slight straightening, a small internal rearrangement, the way a person's body responds when memory arrives faster than thought. She said nothing, not yet. She turned and walked back inside. The hallways of Westbrook Elementary smelled of construction paper and whiteboard markers, and something vaguely lemony from the cleaning solution the custodial staff used on the linoleum. Children's artwork lined the corridor walls, self-portraits and watercolor animals and poems written in the oversized handwriting of people who had only recently learned that letters had a specific order. Lily's class was in the third room on the left, a bright space with large windows and tables arranged in clusters rather than rows, a hand-lettered sign above the white board read PARENTS UHOINSPIRE. The event had been organized with care. Each student would invite their parent or guardian to speak briefly about their work, about their family, about something that made the child proud. It was the kind of exercise that was simple in its structure and entirely unpredictable in its emotional range. Ethan sat with Lily at her table near the window, third from the door. Around them other parents settled in. He was the only one in the room wearing rolled sleeves and work boots. He was also the only one who, before sitting down, helped the school's older security guard drag a heavy plastic bin of decorations from the hallway into the storage closet at the back of the room, because he had seen the man struggling with it in the corridor, and no one else had stopped. "You didn't have to do that," the guard said, slightly breathless. "You needed the help," Ethan said, as if that were the entire explanation, because to him it was. Vanessa, who had arrived in the room just behind him and seen the exchange, said nothing. She filed it away the way people file things they don't yet have a category for. The presentations began. A father who ran a logistics company spoke for 4 minutes about supply, chain management, and international shipping, and the children in the front row nodded with expressions of polite incomprehension. A mother who worked in real estate brought laminated photographs of houses. A man who taught music at the community college played 30 seconds of something on a small recorder he'd brought in his coat pocket, and the children applauded with the genuine enthusiasm that adults rarely manage. Vanessa spoke, when her daughter's turn came, fluently, confidently, about building a brand and learning to lead, and the parents in the room listened with the kind of attention that comes partly from genuine interest and partly from being in the presence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Then Lily raised her small hand and said, "My dad." Ethan stood. He was taller than most of the other parents, and the room felt slightly smaller when he unfolded himself from the child-sized chair. He walked to the front of the room and turned to face the class. He had spent the drive over quietly rehearsing a few sentences. Is something simple about fixing cars, about how engines worked, about the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it run again. He had not expected to feel the particular weight of 40 pairs of eyes, some curious, some politely indifferent, a few carrying the particular expression of adults who had already made up their minds. "My name is Ethan," he said. "I'm Lily's dad. I fix cars for a living." He paused. "I fix them because my father taught me how, and because there's something about taking something that people have given up on and making it work again that I think matters, not just with cars." A small silence. A boy in the second row, blond, wearing a polo shirt, raised his hand without waiting to be called on. "Is that your car outside, the old blue one?" A few children snickered. One parent, Nat Vanessa, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. Lily's face went very still. "It is," Ethan said. "My mom says people who drive old cars don't care about how they look," the boy said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Your mom might be right about some people," Ethan said. "That car belonged to my father. He's not here any more, so I keep it." He let that sit for a moment, not for effect, but because it was simply true, and simple truths sometimes need a moment. "It's not the newest car in the lot, but it's never let Lily down, and it never let me down when I needed it." He looked at Lily. She was looking at him. The stillness in her face had softened into something else. Teacher, a young woman named Mrs. Patterson, stepped in to move things along. "Thank you, Ethan," she said warmly. "Lily, do you want to show us what you brought?" Lily stood up from her seat. She walked to the front of the room with the card. Stock held in both hands, she unfolded it slowly facing the class, and held it up. The words were visible to the room. "My dad is my hero," she said in a voice that was smaller than she intended but steadier than anyone expected. "My dad works really hard, and he never complains, and he taught me that if you treat people right, it doesn't matter what you drive." She glanced up at Ethan. "He told me that a car's job is to get you where you're going, and we always get where we're going." The room was quiet in the way rooms get when something true has been said simply. And then the boy in the second row said under his breath, but not under it, enough, still kind of embarrassing though. Lily heard it. Her eyes went down the card, which she had spent the better part of 2 evenings making, dropped slightly in her hands. She didn't cry because she was trying very hard not to, and that effort, the visible effort of a 7-year-old holding herself together in public, was its own kind of heartbreak. Ethan saw it, every part of it. He did not raise his voice, he did not address the boy directly. He crouched down to Lily's level there at the front of the classroom in front of everyone, and said quietly but clearly enough to carry, "I'm proud of you. The card is perfect, you're perfect. Don't let anybody else's opinion live in your head rent-free." Lily almost smiled at that almost. He straightened up, thanked Mrs. Patterson, and walked back to his seat. He was aware of every eye in the room on the way back. He kept his face open and unhurried, and he sat down, and he placed his hand briefly on the back of Lily's chair when she returned to her seat, just resting there warm and steady like a fact. Vanessa, sitting tables away, watched him. There was something in what had just happened that she couldn't entirely organize into the framework she usually used for things. She was accustomed to reading situations quickly and cleanly, and this one had introduced a variable she hadn't accounted for. The morning program continued. Refreshments were set out in the hallway, juice boxes for the children, coffee in paper cups for the adults, parents clustered in small, self-selecting groups. Ethan stood near the far end of the refreshment table, with Lily beside him, and if people moved slightly away from them, he didn't track it. He was talking to Lily, quietly, bending down to her level, and she was talking back, still holding the card. A girl from Lily's class approached them. She had dark curly hair and a gap between her 2 front teeth. "I liked your card," she said to Lily. "I wish I thought of writing something like that." Lily looked at her. "You could still make one," she said. "The ribbon on mine took 4 tries." The girl smiled. The gap in her teeth made it larger than it might have been otherwise. She went back to her grip, and Lily watched her go with an expression that was not quite confident yet, but was on its way. The formal portion of the program reconvened in the school's main hall, a larger space with a low stage and rows of folding chairs. The afternoon ceremony was the centerpiece of Parents' Day, a brief recognition of the school's history in acknowledgement of its sponsors, and then an open portion where children and families could share. The lights in the hall were bright, and the stage had a single microphone on a stand and a projection screen on the back wall. Parents filtered in and took their seats. Children sat beside them, some swinging their feet, some leaning sideways into their parents' shoulders. Principal Hensley stepped on the stage. She moved with the unhurried authority of someone who had stood in front of this kind of gathering many times, and no longer felt the need to perform composure because she simply had it. She adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "Parents' Day at Westbrook is one of my favorite events of the year, not because of the decorations all, though they are very good," a small, appreciative laugh from the crowd, "but because it reminds us why this school exists, not for the programs, not for the rankings, not for the funding for the children, and for the communities that built this place and continue to sustain." She paused. She looked out at the assembled families. "Before we continue," she said, I want to share something that I think most of you don't know, something I learned or remembered this morning." She glanced toward the side of the room, where a projector cable ran to a laptop on a small table. "Can we bring up the first image, please?" The screen behind her lit up. The image was a photograph, black and white, grainy in the way of photographs from the 1970s. It showed the exterior of what was recognizably Westbrook Elementary, though the trees were smaller and the facade was slightly different. In front of the building, a group of children stood in a loose cluster, some looking at the camera, some not. Beside them, parked at the curb, was a car. A Ford Mustang, dark in the photograph, though the shade was impossible to determine. Several people in the room leaned forward slightly. 1971, Principal Hensley said. "I was 11 years old. I was a student at this school. She let that land. Westbrook Elementary at that time served a neighborhood that was going through significant change. As many families had relocated, resources were stretched. The school district was dealing with transportation gaps, meaning there were children in this area who had no reliable way to get to school." She paused. "There was a man who lived 3 blocks from here. He was a veteran, recently returned from service. He had a job at an automotive shop on Decatur Street, and he drove a navy blue Ford Mustang, and every morning, for 2 school years, he drove that car through this neighborhood in the cold, in the rain, sometimes before sunrise, and he picked up children who had no other way to get to class. He didn't announce it. He didn't ask for anything. He just showed up." The room was very quiet. "His name was William Walker," Principal Hensley said. In the 5th row, Ethan went very still. William Walker also made an anonymous donation in 1973 that funded the renovation of what is now the Hensley Reading Room, named for my late mother, who was the librarian here for 30 years, and who knew William personally. My mother told me about him when I was young, and I never forget, but I confess I had not thought about him in some years. She looked directly at Ethan until this morning, when I saw a navy blue Mustang in our parking lot, license plate U1971, the same plate, the same car. A murmur moved through the room. Ethan sat with his hands on his knees looking at the stage, and the expression on his face was the kind that happens when a person receives information that rare, and the interior architecture of something they thought they already understood. He had known his father. There was a kind man. He had known about the car. He had not known about the mornings. He had not known about the library. Lily was looking up at her father. She had not fully understood everything that was being said, but she understood enough. She understood that the principal was talking about her grandfather. She understood that the room had changed. She slipped her hand into Ethan's. He closed his fingers around hers. "I want to say something directly," Principal Hensley continued, and there was a new quality in her voice now, something that had moved past ceremony into something plainer. "And there, for more serious, this morning in our parking lot a man was made to feel unwelcome because of the car he drives. That car is not an embarrassment to this school. That car is part of this school's history, and the man who drives it is the son of someone who gave to this community quietly and without recognition, the way the best things are always given." She looked at Vanessa Cole. Vanessa did not look away. She was not a person who looked away as a rule, but something in her posture had shifted, a particular kind of stillness that in someone accustomed to moving confidently through the world signals that the ground has changed underfoot. The room was silent in a way that rooms rarely are when they contain that many people, not the silence of discomfort, though there was some of that, the silence of recalibration. Principal Hensley stepped back from the microphone, then she stepped down from the stage and walked directly to where Ethan and Lily were seated. "I'm sorry," she said to him, "that this took so long to say." Ethan stood. He was considerably taller than her. "You didn't owe me anything," he said. "William Walker drove my daughter to school for 2 years," she said, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before, something that had come from a different room in her. than the one where Principal at a podium lived in the snow in the dark, without a word. I owe you everything. She extended her hand. He took it. She held it with both of hers for a moment. Lily watched this. Her chin was trembling slightly. She was holding the card with both hands pressed to her chest, just as she had held it in the car that morning. She looked at her father the way children look at their parents in those rare moments when they see them not as the fixed and permanent thing they rely on, but as a person specific and real and quietly extraordinary. In the fourth row, Vanessa Cole sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the stage. Though the stage was now empty, she was thinking. It was visible in her face, not the calculating, surface-level processing she applied to most situations, but something slower and less comfortable, the kind of thinking that involves looking at yourself and not quite liking the angle. She had said the things she'd said because she had learned in the particular world she moved through that positioning mattered, that appearance is communicated value, and that presenting oneself as someone who maintained standards was a form of credibility. She had applied that logic to a parking lot, to a man who had done nothing to her, to a child holding a hand-made card. She thought about the card. She had seen it at the front of the class room. My dad is my hero. She thought about the girl's voice when she read it aloud, small and steady, trying to hold its ground. She stood. It was not a dramatic gesture. She simply stood, walked up the center aisle to where Ethan was still standing near his row of chairs, and stopped in front of him. Some people in the room noticed, some did not. She wasn't performing, that was the difference. I was wrong, she said. She was looking directly at him, and her voice was level. What I said this morning was unkind, and it was wrong, and I said it in front of your daughter, which makes it worse. I'm sorry. Ethan looked at her for a moment. He did not say that it was fine. He did not wave it away. He said, "Thank you for saying that." Vanessa looked at Lily. "I'm sorry to you, too," she said. "Your dad sounds like exactly the kind of person a kid should be proud of." Lily looked at her with the direct measuring gaze of a child who is deciding whether to trust something. Then she said, "He is." It was not forgiveness exactly. It was something more honest than that, an acknowledgement offered with the uncomplicated clarity that adults usually lose, and then spend years trying to find again. Vanessa nodded. She went back to her seat. The room began to breathe again. Conversations started up quietly at first, and then with more texture. Mrs. Patterson appeared at Ethan's elbow with a cup of coffee, actual coffee, from a thermos she'd brought from home, not the paper cup variety, and pressed it in his hands without explanation. The security guard he'd helped earlier came by and clasped his shoulder and said nothing, because nothing needed to be. Principal Hensley returned to the stage for the closing portion of the program. She announced without fanfare that the school board had discussed a new initiative the prior month, a merit scholarship for students demonstrating community values to be awarded annually. She announced that the first recipient had been selected, and that in honor of the scholarship's inspiration, it would be called the William Walker Community Award. She said Lily Walker's name. Lily looked at her father looked at her. The room applauded, and this time the applause was not the polite, obligatory kind, but the kind that meant something, the kind that comes from a room that has been through something together and arrived somewhere different from where it started. Lily walked up to the stage to receive a small framed certificate. She held it in one hand and the card in the other. She stood at the microphone, which was too tall for her, and Principal Hensley adjusted it down. Lily looked out at the room with her father's gray-blue eyes and a steadiness in her face that was entirely her own. "Thank you," she said into the microphone. "I'm going to tell my dad about the carburetor later." Laughter moved through the hall, warm, wide, entirely genuine. Ethan laughed too. It was a real laugh, the kind that is the whole face. Lily saw it from the stage, and that was all she needed. The afternoon wound down the way good afternoons do gradually, without anyone wanting to be the first to leave. Families collected coats and bags. Children ran circuits of the hallway, While their parents talked, the punch bowl was finished, the cookies were mostly gone, the volunteers began collecting the folding chairs. Ethan walked Lily back through the school and out the front entrance the same way they had come in that morning. The sun was lower now, coming in at a longer angle, turning the parking lot gold and slightly hazy. Most of the other cars had already gone. The Mustang sat where it had been left alone now near the back of the lot, its navy paint warm in the afternoon light. Lily walked up to it and put her hand flat on the side panel. She stood like that for a moment. "Did Grandpa really drive kids to school?" she asked. "Apparently he did," Ethan said. "Did you know?" "No," he said. "I knew he was a good man. I didn't know about the mornings." Lily was quiet for a moment, her hand still on the car. "I think that's why it feels different in here," she said, "like there's more in it than just us." Ethan looked at her. At 7 years old, she had said something that would take most people many more years to arrive at. If they ever did, he didn't try to add to it. He just nodded. He opened her door, helped her in, adjusted her seatbelt. He walked around to the driver's side and got in. The little cross on the leather cord swayed once and settled. The smell of peppermint was still in the air. He put his hand on the key and paused. He thought about his father driving these streets in the dark, picking up children he had no obligation to in a car that was already old when Ethan was born. He thought about how he had kept the car through every hard season, the years when it would have bought him a month's rent, the winter when Lily needed a coat, and had never been entirely sure why, only that it felt important the way some things feel. Important before you know the reason. He knew now, or he knew more than he had. The car was not just thing his father had left behind. It was a record of who his father had been, and it had been taking them all this time where they needed to go. He started the engine. It turned over with that low, honest sound, not a roar, not a performance, but the sound of something reliable and enduring and real. Lily had her certificate on her lap and the card on top of it. She was looking out the window at the school, the balloons still tied to the fence posts, though one had come loose and was drifting slowly upward into the afternoon sky. "Dad," she said, "next year, can I bring the card again, or I need to make a new one?" He looked at her. "Make a new one," he said. "Same thing on it, though." She thought about this with the seriousness of someone for whom the question is genuinely important. Then she nodded. The Mustang pulled out of the parking lot slowly, its tires rolling across the painted lines, moving past the empty spaces where the SUVs and sedans had been, past the banner that was beginning to curl at one corner in the afternoon wind, past the iron fence posts and the balloons and the bright, specific smell of cut grass. It moved down the street the way it always did, steady, unhurried, carrying what it had always carried, memory and love, and people on their way home. Some miles away in her office that evening, Vanessa Cole sat at her desk with a blank page in front of her. She had been trying to write a message and had deleted it 3 times. The 4th time she did not delete it. She wrote, "I would like to make a contribution to the William Walker Community Award Fund in whatever amount is most useful to the program's continuance. Please let me know who to contact." She read it over once. She sent it. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out a legal pad and a pen, and she began to write something that was not a business communication. It was a note to herself, which she would not share with anyone, about the things she had seen that day and the gap between what she had assumed and what had turned out to be true. She wrote until the light outside her window went from gold to gray, and then she put the pen down and sat for a while in the quiet. She thought about a girl holding a hand made card with both hands. She thought about a man crouching down to straighten a ribbon. She thought about a car in a parking lot in the morning light, covered in years, carrying a history no one had bothered to look for. She thought about the fact that she had not looked, that she had seen, and immediately decided the way she had been trained to decide, the way the world she moved in rewarded you for deciding quickly, confidently, without ambiguity. She thought about how completely wrong she had been, not in a complicated way, in the simplest way. There is she had looked at a person and seen only the surface of him, and the surface had told her nothing true. She would not, she understood, be able to undo the morning the words had been said. Lily had heard them. That was a real thing that had happened in the world and would remain in it, but she could move differently from here. She was not sure yet what all of that would look like. She knew it would involve more than a donation, though that was a start. She knew it would require paying a different kind of attention than she was accustomed to paying. She thought she might be capable of it. She was not entirely sure, but she was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely uncertain about something that was not a business problem. And she found that the uncertainty did not feel bad. It felt, in a way she couldn't quite name, like the beginning of something. Across town, in a small house with a garage attached, Ethan Walker sat on the edge of Lily's bed after she had fallen asleep. She had showered and changed in pajamas and eaten half a bowl of cereal because she said she wasn't hungry, but also ate all of it before claiming she wasn't hungry. The certificate from the school was propped against the lamp on her dresser. The card, "My Dad is My Hero," was folded on the nightstand beside a glass of water and a small stuffed rabbit that was missing one eye. Ethan sat in the dim light and looked at his daughter sleeping, her hair loose now from the ribbon spread across the pillow in dark waves. Her face in sleep was entirely relaxed, all the effort of the day gone out of it, and she looked like herself in the most unguarded possible way. He thought about his father. He thought about how you can know a person all your life and still find out afterward that there were rooms in them you never entered, hallways you never walked down, whole wings of their interior life. You simply had no map to. He thought about his father at 20-something, getting up before the sky was light, starting the Mustang in the dark, driving down streets that Ethan now drove himself, and picking up children nobody else was picking up. He thought about how his father had never mentioned it, not once, had just done it. The way he had done everything that mattered, quietly, without looking for the credit, without even seeming to think there was anything to comment on. It was just a thing that needed doing, and he could do it, and so he did. Ethan had tried to live like that. He had not always succeeded. There were mornings he had felt the weight of what he didn't have, the shape of the life he was supposed to be providing against the life he was actually providing. There were nights when the garage felt small, and the future felt narrow, and the loneliness of raising a child alone felt absolute. But he had gotten up every morning, and he had made her breakfast, and he had driven her to school, and he had tried to be steady, because steady was the thing he could offer when he could not offer other things. He had not known until today that the car he drove had been doing the same thing long before he was the one driving it, that it had a history of showing up, that it had, in some literal way, been part of the reason some of the people in that school today had been able to get an education at all. He didn't know whether that changed anything. He didn't think it needed to. His father's goodness was not more real now that a room full of people knew about it. It had been real on the cold mornings when no one was watching, but there was something in knowing something that settled in him slowly, like a key that had been floating in a pocket, finally finding its lock. He was his father's son. He had always been. He just hadn't known quite what that meant until today. He stood up quietly. He pulled the blanket up over Lily's shoulder. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at her. "Good night," he said softly to the room, to his daughter, to the version of the day that was now behind them. He went back to the garage. He didn't turn on the radio. He pulled on his work gloves and crouched beside the Mustang, and began, with the patience and attention he applied to everything he cared about, to work on a small repair he'd been putting off for 2 weeks, a minor alignment-ish. In the front left that he'd been meaning to address, he worked slowly, checking and checking, not rushing. The garage was warm from the heat of the day, still stored in the concrete walls. The light was yellow and steady overhead. The cross on the rearview mirror caught it and held it. He worked for an hour, then he stepped back and looked at the car. It was the same car it had been that morning in every measurable way, same paint, same dent, same chrome, same weight and years and honest mileage, but Ethan Walker crouched in his garage on a Tuesday evening after the strangest and most important day his family had had in a long time, looked at it differently, not because anyone had told him to, because he had always known somewhere behind the knowing that some things do not need to be new to be worth keeping, that some things not shine on the surface because all their light is on the inside, and that a child who rides to school in a car full of history is not a child who has less than others. She is a child who has more. He turned off the garage light, he went inside, he locked the door, and somewhere in the house, in a room with a one-eyed rabbit and a hand-made card and a framed certificate, it leaning against a lamp, his daughter slept soundly, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dream on the best days of their young and still unfolding lives.